Okay. I want you to close your eyes for a second.
Unless you're driving.
Right, yeah. Definitely do not close your eyes if you are behind the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are somewhere safe, just visualize this. You are standing on a subway platform in New York City.
Very specific vibe.
Exactly.
Mm.
Let's say you're in Brooklyn. The air is cool, maybe a little damp. You've got that distinct smell of steel dust and ozone.
The brakes. That smell is the brakes.
Yeah, that metallic kind of friction smell.
Yeah.
And you look at the walls, and there's that very specific clinical white rectangular tile.
Mm-hmm.
Classic 1930s institutional chic, I like to call it.
With the colored bands near the ceiling.
Right, maybe a deep maroon or a sharp cobalt blue, depending on the station.
It feels very heavy down there. Very permanent.
It feels like a bunker. So you get on the train, the doors slide shut with that aggressive thud, and you are hurtling through the dark, deep underground. The ride is fast. The tunnel lights blur by. You are deep in the belly of the city.
And you are almost certainly riding the A train.
The famous A train.
It has a real personality, doesn't it? I mean, it's the longest run in the system, and when it's in Brooklyn, it moves with a very serious sense of purpose.
It really does. It's flying under Fulton Street.
Yeah.
But then 20, maybe 30 minutes later, something shifts.
The pitch of the engine changes.
Yeah, it starts to whine a bit more. The train starts to climb. And the darkness outside the window starts to turn gray and then bright.
It bursts out.
Suddenly you burst out of the tunnel. Blinding sunlight hits those dusty, scratched windows, and you are rattling along on an elevated track that feels, well, let's be honest, it feels fragile.
It feels ancient compared to the tunnel.
Totally. The steel looks different. The architecture is completely different. You're suddenly looking into people's second-story apartment windows.
It is a really jarring moment for a lot of riders because you have essentially just traveled through time.
Right.
You went from a Great Depression-era tunnel built with federal might and massive amounts of concrete to a pre-World War I elevated structure built by a private company. And that all happens in the span of about 30 seconds.
And that right there is why we are here today. We are doing a deep dive into the IND Fulton Street Line.
A fascinating piece of infrastructure.
And look, I know what you are probably thinking out there. It's just a subway line. It's the A and the C. We ride it to work. But looking at the stack of documents we have here today.
We have a lot of documents.
We really do. We've got old engineering reports, transit commission maps from the 20s, construction photos from the 30s. Based on all of this, this isn't just a train. This is a physical timeline of the 20th century.
I would argue it's the most Frankenstein line in the entire New York City system.
Frankenstein is the perfect word for it.
It really is. It is a patchwork of dreams, dynamite political feuds, global wars, and some honestly baffling engineering compromises.
It starts in the optimism of the Roaring '20s, gets bogged down in the Depression, pauses for World War II, and ends up in the suburban sprawl of Queens.
Which was never the original plan.
Exactly. And it is the ghost of a future that never happened. We're going to get into the second system, which was this massive plan to turn Queens into a transit paradise that, well, it didn't quite pan out.
Not at all.
So stick with us, because by the end of this deep dive, you are never going to look at the A train the same way again. Our mission is to trace this route from the bottom of the East River all the way to the rooftops of Ozone Park.
So let's start with the geography, just so everyone is oriented.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
We are talking about the route that runs from the Cranberry Street Tunnel that is deep under the East River, connecting Lower Manhattan to Brooklyn.
Right near Brooklyn Heights.
Correct. It runs through central Brooklyn, mostly under Fulton Street, swinging out into East New York and then terminating in Ozone Park, Queens.
Okay, so let's unpack the anatomy of this beast.
Yeah.
Because looking at these schematics, it is not just one long, simple tube, is it?
Far from it.
It is a very specific setup designed for a very specific kind of efficiency.
Yes. The main trunk of the line, primarily under Fulton Street, Pitkin Avenue, and Liberty Avenue, is a 4-track system.
Now, for those who aren't transit engineers, why is 4 tracks the magic number? Why not 2? Why not just build a really wide tunnel with 6?
Well, 6 is usually overkill and too expensive, but 2 is a massive bottleneck. It comes down to redundancy and speed. If you only have 2 tracks, one going north, one going south, every train has to stop at every station.
Like the L train.
Exactly like the L.
Oh.
Or worse, if a train breaks down, the entire line is dead. You are stuck because there is no way around it.
Which, as anyone who rides the subway knows, is a special kind of hell. Being stuck behind a sick passenger or a broken signal on a 2-track line.
Precisely. But a 4-track system allows you to separate the service. You have 2 local tracks on the outside stopping everywhere to pick up the volume of passengers, and then you have 2 express tracks in the middle, bypassing the smaller stops, carrying people long distances very quickly.
It separates the commuter from the traveler in a sense.
That is a good way to put it. It allows for high capacity without sacrificing velocity.
Which gives us the dynamic duo of this line, the A and the C.
Correct. The C is your local workhorse.
The slow one.
Well, it has to be. It stops everywhere in Brooklyn, picking up the volume. It is the train for the person going from, say, Clinton, Washington to J Street.
Right. Just hopping a few neighborhoods over.
Meanwhile, the A is the express powerhouse. In Brooklyn, the A is incredibly fast because the stops are spaced widely apart. It is designed to get you from the deep boroughs into Manhattan as fast as physically possible.
And here's where it gets super interesting looking at the track maps. The A changes its identity the moment it hits Queens.
It does.
It goes from being this aggressive Type A express train to a local.
It does, and this is a direct result of the physical infrastructure. Once the A hits that elevated structure in Queens, the 4 tracks disappear.
Right, because the elevated structure isn't wide enough.
Exactly. It becomes a 2-track or 3-track elevated line depending on the segment. There is no room for express service in the same way. So the A makes every single stop in Queens. It becomes a sleepy local train.
And the C train, what happens to the C?
The C never even makes it to Queens. It terminates at the border at Euclid Avenue.
So the architecture literally dictates the service pattern.
Yeah.
You physically cannot run 4 tracks of service in Queens because the concrete and steel structure does not exist to support it.
Exactly. So if you are riding the A from 207th Street in Manhattan all the way to Far Rockaway, you are experiencing 3 or 4 different types of railroad in one seat.
You are on a local in Manhattan, an express in Brooklyn, a local in Queens, then crossing a bay on a trestle.
It is the ultimate tour of the system's varying standards.
But before we get to Queens and that elevated section, we have to talk about the underground section in Brooklyn. Because there are some stations here that make absolutely no sense unless you understand the engineering constraints of the 1920s.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
We need to talk about Nostrand Avenue.
Nostrand Avenue is a headache. An engineering headache, that is.
It is a split-level station. Usually in New York, you stand on a platform and the express is on one side of you and the local is on the other. You just walk across.
It is seamless cross-platform transfer.
Right. But at Nostrand, the express tracks are upstairs and the local tracks are downstairs. It feels like a dungeon down there on the lower level. Why would they do that? Do they just want to confuse people?
It wasn't an aesthetic choice, I promise you. It was pure geometry. You have to remember they were building this line directly under Fulton Street.
Which is a major commercial artery.
Right, but it isn't infinitely wide. To build a standard 4-track station with 2 island platforms, you need a tunnel box that is about 100 to 120 feet wide.
Okay.
Now, if the street above is only 80 feet wide from building line to building line, you have a massive problem.
Because if you dig a 120-foot hole under an 80-foot street, you are digging into the basements of all those shops and brownstones.
Or worse, you are undermining their foundations and causing the buildings to collapse into the cut.
That would be bad.
Very bad. So the engineers in the late 20s did the only thing they could do. They stacked the tracks.
They put the express on top of the local.
Yes, to keep the tunnel narrow enough to fit between the building lines of Fulton Street.
It's a literal tight squeeze. They basically folded the subway in half to make it fit.
It saved the buildings on Fulton Street, but it created that unique, slightly claustrophobic split-level station we have today. It is a compromise set in concrete.
And then literally just a few stops later, you have the exact opposite problem. You have Hoyt-Schermerhorn.
A massive complex.
This station is huge. It feels like an airport hangar buried underground. The ceilings are high. The station is incredibly wide.
Hoyt-Schermerhorn is a fascinating case of what we call overbuilding. It is a 6-track station.
6 tracks.
6. You have the Fulton Street trains, the A and C, and then you have the crosstown trains, the G, running perpendicular but sharing the same level.
But if you stand on that platform right now and look across the tracks, you see nothing.
You see dead platforms.
You see these wide, dusty platforms that are completely dark, no passengers, no signs, maybe a stray rat or two.
Yeah.
It is incredibly creepy.
It is.
I've looked at them all waiting for the U-Way. Late at night. It looks like a movie set for a post-apocalyptic film.
It often is used for that, actually. Hoyt-Schermerhorn is a favorite for film crews because they can use those abandoned platforms without stopping regular service. Michael Jackson filmed the Bad music video there.
Really? I didn't know that. But those platforms, they tell a story of a massive failure, don't they?
They do. Those are the platforms for the Court Street shuttle.
Let's unpack the Court Street saga, because this is the ghost station of the line. What was the plan here based on the documents?
The planners in the 1920s thought they needed a dedicated local train to terminate in downtown Brooklyn. They looked at the projected numbers and believed that there would be so much demand for a local service that just went from residential Brooklyn neighborhoods to the downtown Civic Center.
Meaning City Hall, the courts,
Yeah.
the business district there.
Exactly. So they built a spur line.
So a train would peel off from the main line and go to this dead-end station called Court Street.
Yes. It opened in 1936 along with the rest of the main line.
How did it do?
Absolute silence. Nobody used it.
Why not, though? Downtown Brooklyn was and is incredibly busy.
It was a logistical failure of human behavior. Court Street Station was built geographically very close to the Hoyt-Schermerhorn and J Street stations.
Oh, I see.
If you were a commuter, why would you get off your train, wait for a special shuttle to take you to a station that is only a 3-block walk from where you already are?
You wouldn't. You would just walk the 3 blocks.
Plus, the transfer itself at Hoyt-Schermerhorn was clumsy. People hate transferring.
So they spent millions of dollars. They built an entire station, tunnels, tracks, signaling for absolutely nothing.
Essentially, yes. Ridership was abysmal from day one. It bled money for 10 years. Finally, the Board of Transportation looked at the numbers and killed it in 1946.
But they didn't fill it in with concrete.
Yeah.
They didn't demolish it to save money on upkeep.
No, they just locked the doors. And this is the beautiful irony of the Fulton Street Line. The biggest failure of the line became its greatest cultural asset today.
Because that abandoned station, Court Street, is now the New York Transit Museum.
Exactly.
I love that place. If you are listening to this and you haven't been, you have to go. The entrance is literally just a subway entrance on a sidewalk in Brooklyn. You go down the stairs, and you are in a 1936 station frozen in time.
And if you visit the museum, you are physically walking through the ghost of the Fulton Street Line. The vintage cars they keep there, the ones with the wicker seats and the ceiling fans, they're sitting on the actual tracks that were built for that failed shuttle. The failure is what preserved the history.
That's amazing. Okay, so we have the tight squeeze at Nostrand, the massive ghost town at Hoyt. Now let's move back to the construction itself. Because looking at these reports from 1929, the actual act of building this thing sounds like a nightmare.
Nightmare is the exact right word. You really have to remember the historical context here. Groundbreaking for the line was April 16th, 1929.
1929, the year everything changed.
The stock market crash happened 6 months later. So this line was built almost entirely during the Great Depression. The city was broke. The country was broke. People were desperate for work.
So labor was incredibly cheap, but money for machines was tight.
Labor was certainly available, yes. But the conditions described in the reports, the documents detail a hand shovel method for large sections of the line.
A hand shovel method. For a subway tunnel.
Yes.
We are talking about moving millions of tons of earth. We're talking about digging a trench 40 feet deep and 100 feet wide down a major avenue. Why weren't they using steam shovels? They had machines in the 30s.
They had them, but they couldn't use them. The subsurface of Fulton Street was a spaghetti bowl of utilities.
A spaghetti bowl.
Imagine a century of infrastructure buried haphazardly under the dirt. Gas mains, water lines, fragile vitrified clay sewer pipes, early telephone ducts, telegraph wires, pneumatic tubes.
Just a mess.
It was so dense and so poorly mapped that if you stuck a giant steam shovel bucket into the ground, you would blindly sever the nervous system of Brooklyn.
And probably blow up a city block if you hit a high-pressure gas main.
Precisely. The gas mains were the biggest danger. One spark from a steel shovel hitting a subterranean rock, combined with a leaking gas main, you have a catastrophe. So they mandated that they had to dig it by hand.
I want to picture this. Thousands of men.
Thousands of men down in the dirt, pickaxes, shovels, wheelbarrows. They would expose the pipes by hand, carefully hang them from the temporary timber decking above with chains, and then dig around them.
It was surgical excavation on a massive scale.
Surgical and incredibly dangerous.
That gives a whole new meaning to the word infrastructure. It wasn't just pouring concrete, it was urban archaeology. They were unearthing the city's old guts while trying to build a brand new organ underneath.
And they had to be incredibly patient. There is a detail in the Board of Transportation specifications that really struck me when reviewing the sources.
Oh, I saw that in the notes, the 4-month rule.
Yes, the soil settlement clause. After they built the concrete tunnel box down in the trench and backfilled the dirt on top of it to bring the street level back up, they weren't allowed to pave the street immediately.
Why not? Just throw some asphalt down and get the cars back on the road.
Gravity. They had to wait 4 months. They left Fulton Street, a major commercial thoroughfare, as a dirt road for 4 solid months, just to let the rain and gravity naturally compress the soil.
Because if they didn't.
If they paved it immediately, the road would have buckled and cracked within weeks as the hidden air pockets settled out and the dirt compacted under the weight of traffic.
So imagine that. Fulton Street just being a mud pit for a third of a year. The business owners must have absolutely loved that.
Oh, they hated it. The documents show there were lawsuits, constant complaints businesses went under. The construction of the subway decimated the street life above it for years.
But that was the price of progress.
The city was betting that the subway would bring more value in the long run than the disruption cost in the short run.
And eventually it did. Opening day finally comes. April 9th, 1936.
The line opens from J Street to Rockaway Avenue. It was a huge moment for Brooklyn. A quiet, fast subway replacing the noisy, dark, elevated train that used to run above the street.
Right, because before the subway, there was an actual L train on Fulton Street, too.
Yes, the old Fulton Street Elevated, and it was universally despised by the 1930s. It was incredibly loud, it blocked the sun from the storefronts, it dripped oil and grease onto pedestrians.
Taking it down and putting the train underground was seen as civilizing the neighborhood.
It was a massive civic upgrade.
But then history intervenes again. We get to what I call the interrupted line phase in the documents.
The war, World War II.
Right, so construction is moving east. They are pouring concrete past Rockaway Avenue. They are heading toward East New York. It is 1941.
And then Pearl Harbor happens, December 1941. Suddenly, building a subway in Brooklyn is not a national priority. The priority is tanks, battleships, and bombers.
What specifically stopped the subway, though? Was it just a lack of municipal funds? Or was it manpower, since everyone was drafted?
It was actually materials, specifically copper and steel. A subway needs miles and miles of copper for the third rail, for the signaling relays, for the power substations. It needs thousands of tons of steel for the tracks and the reinforcement bars inside the concrete.
And the Federal War Production Board stepped in and said no.
They said, we need that copper for bullet casings and communication wire. We need that steel for Liberty ships and Sherman tanks. You could not buy copper in 1942 for a civilian project. It was all strictly rationed for the war effort.
So the city just stopped.
Cold stop. December 1942. The Board of Transportation literally walked away from the active construction sites.
What happened to the tunnels they had already dug?
They just sat there in the dark. There were stations like Broadway East New York, which is what we now call Broadway Junction, that were physically finished.
Finished like you could walk into them.
Yes. The tile was on the wall, the concrete stairs were poured, the wooden ticket booths were built, but there were no signals and no steel tracks.
Just dark, empty concrete shells echoing under the street.
Mm-hmm.
That is incredibly eerie.
It is a ghost tunnel scenario. Imagine being a kid living in East New York in 1943, knowing there is a massive, beautifully tiled cavern right under your street that goes absolutely nowhere.
It wasn't until the war ended and the global supply chains normalized that they could resume work.
And even then, it took quite a while to spin the massive gears of construction back up.
The documents show the extension to Broadway Junction didn't open until late 1946. And the push to Euclid Avenue took until 1948.
And you can actually see the difference, right, if you look closely at the architecture of the stations.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of my favorite details to look out for. If you get off at a station like Ralph Avenue or Rockaway Avenue, which were built in the mid-30s, the tiles are a certain style. The name tablets are very intricate. But if you go out to Euclid Avenue or Shepherd Avenue, which were built post-war, the feel is completely different. How so? What changed in 10 years?
It is the lighting and the finish. The 1936 stations were designed for incandescent bulbs. They produce a softer, yellower light. There are more shadows. The 1948 stations introduced fluorescent lighting.
The harsh, buzzing blue-white light of the future.
Exactly. The Atomic Age aesthetic. It was brighter, it was cleaner, and it felt much more modern for 1948. They wanted to banish the shadows of the Depression and the war. So as you ride the line from downtown Brooklyn out to East New York, you are literally riding from the incandescent 30s into the fluorescent late 40s.
Okay, so We finally reach Euclid Avenue. We are at the physical edge of the city, basically. We are right near the Queens border. But we still need to get the train to Ozone Park. And this is where the Frankenstein surgery happens. The takeover. This is one of the most impressive feats of engineering on the entire line, and also, frankly, the most bizarre.
Set the scene for us based on the historical record. You have a brand new concrete tunnel deep underground at Euclid, and you have an old, rickety, elevated train line running high above Liberty Avenue in Queens.
The Liberty Avenue L. It was originally built by the BMT, the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Corporation, which was the private competitor to the city-owned IND system back in 1915.
So it was already 40 years old by the time the subway tunnel reached it.
Yes. It was part of the dual contracts expansion era. It was serving Ozone Park for decades before the underground subway even arrived at the border.
So the IND decides we're not going to spend millions to dig a tunnel to Ozone Park. We're just going to steal the BMT's elevated track. Recapture was the polite legal term, but yes. The city had unified the subway system in 1940, buying out all the private companies. So they owned the L now anyway. They wanted to connect their new, deep subway tunnel to these old elevated tracks to create one long, continuous line.
But the problem is the L was already running. Thousands of people in Queens used it every single day to commute. You cannot just shut it down for 6 months to build a massive concrete ramp.
Exactly. You have to keep the city moving. So how do you connect a deep tunnel to a sky-high bridge without stopping the trains?
It sounds like open heart surgery on a living patient.
It really was. They built everything around the active line first. They built the ramp, the incline coming up from the tunnel at Grand Avenue.
Yeah.
They built the entirely new station at Grand Avenue, which sits right at the portal where the train comes out of the ground.
Okay.
And then they planned what they called the cutover.
The cutover. It sounds like a 1950s heist movie.
It was a military-style operation. April 1956. They chose a single weekend. On a Friday, the old elevated trains were running to their old terminus in Brooklyn. Crews went in with oxyacetylene torches and massive cranes. They physically severed the steel tracks of the old L.
They just cut them in half.
Cut them in half, slewed them over, literally bent the steel structures to align with the new ramp coming up from the ground and connected the high voltage power.
In one single weekend.
3 days. By Monday morning, April 29th, the A train came roaring out of the underground tunnel, up the new ramp, and smoothly onto the old elevated structure.
That is wild. Imagine the absolute confusion for the commuters that Monday. We go underground now.
It changed the commute forever.
Yeah.
Suddenly you had a one-seat ride from Ozone Park, Queens, all the way to Midtown Manhattan. No more transferring to a slow elevated train in Brooklyn and then another train to cross the river. It integrated Queens into the economic heart of the city in a way it never had been before.
But there is a catch here, right? The BMTL was built in 1915. Was it actually strong enough? I mean, IND subway cars, the A train, they are heavy steel beasts. They're built like tanks. Old elevated trains from the teens were mostly wooden and very light.
That is the lucky break of history right there. In 1915, for reasons that transit historians still debate, maybe it was incredible foresight. Maybe it was just accidental over-engineering. The BMT built that specific section of the Liberty Avenue L to heavy subway standards.
What does that mean, practically speaking?
It means the steel girders were twice as thick as they strictly needed to be for the light wooden trains of the era. The concrete foundations for the pillars went much deeper into the ground.
So is accidentally future-proofed.
Or intentionally.
Yeah.
The BMT leadership might have suspected that one day heavy steel trains would need to run out there. Because of that specific decision made in 1915, the IND engineers in 1956 could just drive their massive trains right onto it. If that steel had been lighter, the A train could not run there today.
The city would have to tear it down and rebuild the entire structure.
Which they probably wouldn't have had the money to do.
Incredible. So we have the line as we know it today. A tunnel from the 30s forcefully connected to an L from the teens. But now, based on these planning documents, we have to talk about the line we don't know. The ghost map. The second system.
This is the part of the deep dive that makes transit nerds weep. The IND Fulton Street Line was never supposed to end at Ozone Park. It was never supposed to just be a feeder line hooking up to an old L. It was supposed to be the launch pad for a massive futuristic expansion deep into Queens.
We're talking about the ambitious second system plans of 1929 and 1939. This was a comprehensive plan to cover the transit deserts of Queens and subways. And when we say evidence in the documents, we mean stuff you can physically see today while riding the train. Tell us about the bellmouths.
Okay, This is a bit of a treasure hunt for the listeners. Next time you are on the A train, leaving Broadway Junction, heading east toward Euclid Avenue, look out the right-hand window into the tunnel. Just as the train leaves the station and enters the dark, watch the concrete wall.
What exactly am I looking for?
You will see the tunnel wall suddenly flare out. It curves away into the darkness, creating a wide, empty cavern, and then a few seconds later it curves back in.
Like the shape of a bell opening up.
Exactly. It's called a bellmouth. That is a structural provision for a future turnout. The original engineers built the tunnel wall that way so that in the future they could easily bore a new tunnel branching off without having to dynamite the walls and disrupt service on the main line.
They were leaving a door open for the future. Where was that specific branch supposed to go?
That one was supposed to recapture the Jamaica line. It would have created a massive loop service through Queens connecting different residential neighborhoods that are currently totally isolated from each other.
And then there's Euclid Avenue. We mentioned earlier that the C train terminates there.
Yeah.
But the physical tracks keep going.
Yes. If you stand at the very end of the platform at Euclid and look straight into the tunnel, you see 4 tracks heading into the dark. The outer 2 tracks go up the ramp to the elevated line we just talked about, heading to Lefferts Boulevard and the Rockaways. But the center 2 tracks, the express tracks, they continue straight.
And then they just hit a brick wall.
They go straight under Pitkin Avenue for a few blocks, essentially running under the neighborhood, and then they just end in concrete bumpers. They are used as storage tracks now to park out of service trains. But originally they were pointing like a loaded arrow toward Cambria Heights.
Cambria Heights. That is way out there. That is near the Nassau County border. It is deep Queens.
The 1939 transit plan envisioned extending the subway along Pitkin Avenue all the way to Cross Bay Boulevard and then running along Linden Boulevard straight to Cambria Heights. We are talking about an area that is a massive transit desert today.
If you live in Cambria Heights right now, you are taking a bus to another bus just to get to a train. It is easily an hour-and-a-half commute to Manhattan.
Under the second system, it would have been a fast one-seat ride to Wall Street. And the plans were incredibly detailed. They didn't draw a theoretical line on a map. They designed complex flying junctions at Cross Bay Boulevard.
Pause on flying junction for a second. What does that mean technically compared to a regular track intersection?
In a normal flat junction, if a train wants to turn left to go onto a branch line, it has to physically cross over the oncoming tracks in the opposite direction. It is exactly like a car turning left at a busy intersection. That blocks all oncoming traffic. You have to wait for a gap.
Which causes massive delays because one late train messes up the timing for everything else.
Right, cascading delays. A flying junction, however, is like a modern highway interchange. The tracks physically ramp up and fly over or dive under the opposing tracks through separate tunnels so that trains can merge and diverge without ever stopping or waiting for oncoming traffic. It allows for incredibly high-speed, high-frequency service.
So they weren't just planning a simple subway extension. They were planning a superhighway for trains. They were planning for a future where Queens was going to be as dense and bustling as Manhattan.
Yes. They were planning for a metropolis that never quite materialized in that way. And the plan died.
Why did it die? Why didn't we get the Super A train to Cambria Heights?
Money, politics, and timing. As we discussed, the war completely drained the public coffers. And then after the war, the entire philosophy of American city planning changed fundamentally. The rise of the personal automobile, and specifically the rise of Robert Moses.
The power breaker himself.
He shifted the city's focus entirely to highways and bridges. Building the Van Wyck Expressway took absolute priority over extending the subway. The public money that could have built the Cambria Heights line went into pouring asphalt for cars. The second system remained a paper dream.
And those express tracks at Euclid are just sitting there waiting?
Waiting for a train that will likely never come. They are essentially the longest, most expensive storage closet in New York.
So let's flash forward. We are in the present day 2026. The line is 90 years old. It is a survivor. But it is also creaking under the weight of its own age. What is happening now based on the recent documentation? Is it just rotting away, or is there hope for modernization?
Modernization is finally happening, and the big story, the expensive story, is the signals.
The traffic lights of the subway system.
For almost 90 years, this line ran on what is called fixed block signaling. Imagine the physical track is divided into invisible zones or blocks. If a train is in Zone A, the signal light in Zone B turns red. No one can enter. It is safe, but it is incredibly inefficient. You have to keep huge physical gaps between trains to ensure they don't rear-end each other.
And if a physical signal breaks, which happens all the time with 1930s technology down in a damp tunnel, the whole line stops. We've all heard the conductor say on the loudspeaker, "We are being held by a signal trouble ahead."
Exactly. That usually means a literal piece of copper from 1936 has finally corroded. But recently, in December 2025, the MTA awarded a massive contract, $1.3 billion to a company called LK Comstock to install CBTC on the Fulton Street Line.
CBTC. Communications-based train control. Explain that to a 5-year-old. Well, explain it to me.
Okay. Instead of fixed rigid zones on the track, the train itself tells a central computer exactly where it is down to the inch. It uses radio transponders. The computer then calculates the train's speed and braking distance and creates a moving bubble of safety around the train. As the train moves, the bubble moves with it.
So the train behind it doesn't have to wait for a fixed zone to clear. It can get much closer as long as it stays outside that moving digital bubble.
Exactly. This allows trains to run much closer together safely. It drastically increases the capacity of the line. You can run more trains per hour through the same tunnel.
So fewer delays, less crowding on the platforms.
That is the goal. It is the standard for modern rapid transit worldwide. London has it, Paris has it. New York is finally catching up on the Fulton Street Line. But the really interesting thing in these documents is where the money came from to pay for this billion-dollar upgrade.
Do tell. The documents mention a very specific funding source.
The reports explicitly state this is funded by congestion pricing.
Ah, the toll. The controversial fee for driving into Manhattan below 60th Street.
However you feel about the toll, the mechanics of it are a direct wealth transfer. The money paid by drivers in their personal cars to enter the central business district is literally paying for the new digital signals under Fulton Street in Brooklyn.
That is a powerful historical connection. The car is finally paying for the train. It is almost poetic justice for the Robert Moses era.
It is a complete reversal of the 1950s logic where highway money starved the subway. Finally, the transit system is getting the capital. But unfortunately, it is not all good news. We also have to talk about the stations themselves.
The Enhanced Station Initiative. I was reading about this in the 2015 reports.
This was the grand plan a few years ago. The state wanted to make the stations look and feel modern. They promised Wi-Fi USB charging ports at the benches, new artwork, better lighting, digital countdown screens. Stations like Clinton, Washington, and Kingston Throop on the Fulton Line were on the priority list for a major structural overhaul.
And did it happen? Did we get the USB ports in Bed-Stuy?
Budget cuts. The costs ballooned way beyond projections. In 2018, they quietly dropped those specific stations from the program. They got pushed to the next capital plan cycle.
It is the exact same old story, isn't it? From 1929 to 2026. We have a great plan. Oh, wait, we ran out of money. We will do it later.
It is the recurring theme of the Fulton Street Line. It is a line of deferred dreams. It was supposed to be part of a massive second system. Deferred. It was supposed to open fully in 1942. Deferred by war. The stations were supposed to be completely renovated in the 2010s.
Yeah.
Deferred by budget.
And
yet it moves over 200,000 people a day. Every single day.
it works. It's not always pretty. It's ugly in places. It's loud. It's a Frankenstein patchwork of different eras and technologies. But it is the absolute spine of Brooklyn.
It connects the Bed-Stuy brownstones, the East New York housing projects, the Liberty Avenue roti shops, and the international travelers heading to JFK. It is the great equalizer of the city. You see absolutely everyone on the A train.
So what is the ultimate takeaway here? When we look at this line with all its history, what are we really seeing as a society?
I think we're seeing the incredible resilience of imperfect systems. The Fulton Street Line isn't the perfect symmetrical subway the planners drew on paper in 1929. It doesn't go to Cambria Heights. It doesn't have the grand flying junctions, but it adapted to reality. It forcefully connected to the old L. It survived the fiscal crises of the 70s. It is surviving the modern budget cuts today.
It is a scrapper. It is a survivor.
It is a scrapper. And for the everyday rider, my advice is to just look up from your phone sometimes and look out the window.
Look for the bellmouths.
Yes. Look for the flared concrete tunnels near Broadway Junction. Look for the dead, silent platforms at Hoyt-Schermerhorn. Those aren't just weird construction quirks. They are the physical scars of the system. They show you exactly where we tried to go, even if we didn't quite make it.
The ghosts of the city that could have been. And speaking of the future, I have to wonder, as climate change gets worse and sea levels rise, we might be looking at a future where these hand-dug Depression-era tunnels need another massive reinvention. Maybe we'll need a third system just to keep the water out.
That is a terrifying and entirely plausible thought. The infrastructure is always fighting a battle against nature and time.
Well, I think that is a perfect, somewhat provocative place to leave it. Next time you swipe your card or tap your phone and get on that A train, remember you are riding through a living museum of dreams, dynamite, and compromise.
And hold on tight, because the A train runs very fast.
That it does. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We will see you on the next one.